it creates room for rent-seeking, which needs to be another layer of supervision as well.
Look, I think it's an excuse. I think that the government is facing quite a bit of resistance and anger from the population about these proposed tax proposals in the finance bill. And of course, then he has to try and find an explanation. 8% was across all fuel products. And there is no, so the possibility that you can apply it it doesn't exist. That possibility is not there. In any case, fuel, because it's imported collectively and it is handled by Kenya Pipeline. I mean, the controls are such that the questions of that you could apply two rates to it does not arise. In any case, in the economy, there are many goods that, for example, are zero rated for VAT, which means already there are goods which, in fact, there are goods that are VAT exempt, which again, so what he's talking about is totally incorrect. What we should address, is to explain to Kenyans what really is going on. Why is this administration, why is this regime finding itself in a circumstance where it's engaging in what one might say are desperate taxation measures? Where are we in that problem, and what is the best way out of that problem? Part of the answer is in what Professor Iraqi is asking me. And I think he's not asking me, he's reminding Kenyans that, look, we've been in problems before and we've been able to get out of it with proper management. What is it that Kibaki did differently? Kibaki was leaving, his budgets were within so Kibaki's budget deficits were small. He also made a tremendous effort to bring down interest rates. In one time, Treasury bill rate was under 1%, it was something like 0.8%, which meant that there was a lot of money and banks were forced to go and look for customers. Unlike now, you see, if you are a banker today, you know that government will come, as they did this week, and they'll come back on Tuesday, they'll say they want 30 billion. Because they are desperate, they'll pay very high interest rate for it. 11%, 12%, even 14% if it's a longer period bond. So you don't have to do anything, you wait for them. You send your clerk, they fill the forms, and you go to golf. Yeah. I mean, that's literally, yes. Yeah. Now, but that option, if you remove it, then the banks will go looking for customers. And customers will be there, as Mheshimiwa Bunyasi explained, because businesses have to borrow for working capital, for investment, and that. If interest rates are affordable, you will create more economic activity. And that's exactly what the Kibaki administration did. But this administration is doing the opposite, which is that it is increasing interest rates, which makes cost of borrowing higher for themselves, but also for all the other economic actors, which means credit to private sector will be low, which means they will actually not get the taxes they are hoping to get. But they also hurt themselves because then they are borrowing at higher and higher rates. And because remember, there is rollover going on. Basically, the short-term debt from last year is being paid off by raising new debt this year. Okay? So, the Treasury bill of, say, 1 year that was issued last year in May will be paid off by picking some more money from the market today. But this new money it's at a higher interest rate. So basically, you're borrowing at higher and higher rates to retire cheaper debt. And that's what, we are calling debt distress. How can they dial out of it? I repeat, do 3 basic things. First of all, there is no justification really that the budget must grow by 300 billion. What you should actually do is try and get it back below 3 trillion. And we already explained how you could do so. Secondly, bring down interest rates, because the data and the facts are like this. Raising interest rates is not bringing inflation down because of the causes of inflation. To sum it, it would appear that Treasury and Central Bank are not even talking. I say it would appear, I mean, I'm alleging, I don't know. But how can these really experienced senior people be doing things that are where the policies are cancelling out each other? Yeah. So these senior, and perhaps that's why they are quiet, they need to get together and have a coherent thing that allows Kenya to get out of debt distress and that allows production to get back on track. And that's what will create jobs. And in the end, actually, that is what can bring taxes. But the way it is going now, increasing the tax on fuel, looking for very marginal things to tax, is only going to hurt Kenyans more.
Yeah, are you coming to me?
Sure.
Yes, I think so. We make examples frequently between now and the Kibaki era and so on. And generally speaking, Kibaki has been well rated on economic management. We can't take that away from him. But not every reference is correct when we make those kinds of comparisons. President Kibaki inherited, despite Moi's challenges in managing the economy over a 24-year period, he left a debt stock of public debt stock of 885 billion shillings. And Kibaki, after 10 years, also did reasonably well. He increased it by 50% in 10 years to about 1.25 trillion. But in the subsequent administration, the 2 terms of the Uhuru administration were growing it by a factor of more than $1 trillion a year. By the time they left, I think our debt stock, there were some arguments whether it was 10 trillion or 9 trillion or whatever the case, but it was about $1 trillion a year, net increase. That was huge. That was huge. Now, you take over at a time like that. This is just debt stock. The debt service, let's talk about the debt service. I don't know the figures for the debt service proportion. Maybe my friend Ndiritu will have it. At the time Kibaki took over. But at the time Uhuru ended, for debt service, it was something like 73 shillings per 100, about 70%, let's say, of the revenue collection was going to debt. That doesn't leave you much room. So, there was frenzied borrowing all the time. So that the conditions were somewhat different. Secondly, when you raise interest rates, and Muriithi Ndiritu said this over and over, yes, it makes it more costly for you, but it also then means you can't increase it. You can't borrow as much as you would have liked to bring in. Maybe you should. You shouldn't, rather. It cuts always, including yourself. There is a cost to you, and hopefully the Treasury would say, hey, our borrowing can't exceed such a ceiling, so even with borrowing we can't raise that money, so let us cut back. But that conscious cutting back has not come out well. The President said he was cutting the budget by 300 billion, and indeed there were some cutbacks at the time. Many agencies had to surrender a certain amount and so on. And it has been increased back, so, pretty much so to say. Some increase is inevitable because of inflation. Even if you want to stay where you are, you might have to increase just to take care of inflation. But if you could increase less than inflation, then you are reducing it. Inflation, by the factor of the inflation that you are not trying to recover. I think, in my view, what we really need now is the point we have said over and over, and maybe we can't keep going back to it. Let us get these 2 managers to speak out openly, so that by the time the president comes out, there has been some direction. And if they're speaking quietly, and doesn't seem like they're speaking quietly, then I think there must be at least once a year, and I'm saying that tongue in cheek, in which they come out and say what the hell they're doing. Because if not, I think it's very unsatisfactory the way it is. Lastly, if you take countries like India, India has a very strong economic program of their own. But part of it is that in the Indian economy, in the GDP, the proportion of exports is relatively small. And they guard it very carefully. They do not allow IMF, World Bank, or any of these others to fiddle with areas that are not part of what they want them to look at. Period. They are just that. We can't internationalize 100% of our economy, then be subjected to rules that will come from globally generalized, principles rather than what we have to deal with. We have issues around food security. We have issues around social protection, some of which you must guard carefully. And then you can play around with the rest of it that's exposed to the external market. And to do that, the central bank must be up and talking like a central bank in a developing country. The treasury secretaries must say how they want to drive the economy, and let other people, have views that they can express. Even wananchi, even the consumers should be able to express their views. My late mother used to say, when Moi's picture came on the currency, she was saying, "Oh, the Kenyatta notes were much better. They took you much further than this one." Why did they put on his picture? That was her concern. Clearly, she's saying the economic policies have shifted. We can interpret that in many ways and so on. So even the ordinary consumer can make suggestions or can point out to where we are not going. But I think that now, beginning with the new financial year, is when the president's teeth and what you call them, nails must come out. Well, the clothes must come out now, because having come in September, October, you can't turn around the budget much as you might want to. So let us begin looking at it carefully beginning this year and how it's going to go forward. It certainly cannot take the trajectory of ever increasing. That's going to be problematic. But we must contain inflation. And in the fight against inflation, generally, inflation is not just coming from the food side, for example. It is a bit of it. Let us try and manage inflation. That is the biggest cancer that's among us. If we don't, it's going to lead to rounds of demands for wage increases and other things that usually follow when you have high inflation. It's going to undermine the standard of living of the lower income people. Everybody will be sort of touched. But the low income people, it might take them right to the brink of, I was going to say, of existence. That's too much. But I think it will push them right into a corner. So that must be guarded at all costs. It's good to contain it so that real incomes can probably mean something to ordinary people.
Okay. May I just 2 quick points? I know it's Prof's time. Firstly, the conditions of the economy in 2003, in January, are very similar. For instance, the debt to GDP ratio was around 70% at that time. And most of the debt was short-term. If you look at the conditions now, the debt to GDP ratio is around the same, around 70%. And the main problem,
I think it's about 80.
It's about 70%, much more. If I wish we had the budget statement, you could have put it up and say it is about 70%. And the real problem is a large proportion of it is short-term debt that is maturing this calendar year, and that is why Treasury is having some cash flow management issues. So the conditions are rather similar. Number 2,